I am so excited to be here. 2 years ago, we hosted the first version of this conference down at Georgetown. This crazy idea that a few of us had that maybe we could find a way to bring together some of the smartest, sharpest, most forward-thinking minds in this space and really try to plot a path forward for how we continue to grow the impact and the incredible work that is being done. And so to be here 2 years later and to see this growth and to see the incredible direction of travel of this work is just, it really feels like an honor. And I have four incredible minds up here with me, and I'm so excited for this conversation, which I really hope is a precursor to the way that we think about this convening in general. This is a problem-solving space. It is not a space for us to come up here and say, hey, we've got all of the answers and we're gonna, from this stage, tell you all what it is that you should do and what you should not do. It is more about bringing together y'all and giving y'all really the opportunity, the space, the food, to be able to plot that path forward yourselves. And so that sort of spirit of creativity, of innovation, and this shared commitment to really driving this work forward, that's what this convening is all about, and that's what this panel is going to be all about. So I am thrilled to have, I wrote the names not in the order that you guys are sitting, that was rude. Andrew Damaron from Denver Star, Jody Escobar from Albuquerque Community Safety, Aaron Prim from the Dayton Mediation Response Unit, and Moki Macias from Atlanta PAD. Please give it up. And I promise, Barry and I did not actually plan this, but here we are starting with a conversation about sustainability and durability, right? Even in the best of times, a couple of years on, 5 years after the murder of George Floyd, 2 years after the last convening, we would be talking about the durability of programs. How do you become built in to the city landscape so that you aren't vulnerable to the whims of a mayor or a president? How are you thinking about building towards that durability, and how will you know when you've gotten there? Who wants to go first?
Don't look at me so hard to hear.
I didn't mean to.
Okay, I'll start us off. Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with so many friends and more folks to meet. So yeah, I'm happy to kick off our conversation. I think two things from my perspective doing the work that we do in Atlanta, which is, we are a nonprofit, independent organization that's contracted with the city that came out of a community organizing campaign going on now a decade ago. I think regardless of the shape of the program, regardless of if it's a department within city government or a program like ours, I think the people need to be organized to demand it, to fight for it, to protect it, to flank us in the work that we do. So I think that's number one, is that we have to be engaged enough with our community that people know what we do, that they care about what we do, and that they're willing to show up for us. The folks that came to City Hall for PAD were some of them were kind of random people, right? Who they had made a call and our team had come out and they had really appreciated it. But most of them were connected to community organizations, whether they were civic organizations or advocacy groups. And I think that is a huge protective factor for our work, is to have those relationships with the organizations that will come out and do their civic duty to maintain this kind of work. Secondly, briefly, I think the other thing that will be very important as we move forward as a field is that we are organized enough to also advocate for ourselves, that we're organized at a state level to be able to influence what state legislation is happening and what the state funding streams are, and that we're organized at a federal level. So I think that really begs the question for us with AMSA and with other formations. How are we really self-organizing so that we can become a field that lobbies for itself like everybody else does, right? So I think those two pieces will be really important, organizing.
And I like to piggyback on that. With the mediation response unit at the City of Dayton, the Dayton Mediation Center, we were blessed that the Mediation Center has already been part of the City of Dayton for 38 years. And so when it came time to build the response unit, they looked to our Mediation Center to be the vessel for that. And so with a vested interest within the city, we were able to move forward with that, pretty seamlessly in the way of having support from the community, having support from the organization in general. And so going forward, it feels as if it's of vital importance for programming such as ours and all of us in the room to continue to build on what it is that the community has dictated to the municipalities, to the community, generally speaking, that they want our type of programming, the systems and the support that we can provide. And to be able to build on that, be able to, as we were talking about earlier, provide the type of information and sustenance, in a very granular way, and also the stories as well, in order to show that our programming is important and something that people want.
One of the things that Barry said this morning, maybe, there we go. One of the things that Barry said this morning that I really resonated with me was that we need to take the opportunity to really to look at what is not going well and learn from that. I came, prior to joining the city of Denver, I came from the healthcare space, and I had a senior hospital executive who once said, in healthcare, we love to admire a problem. And that is not a trap that I feel that anybody in this room has landed in just yet, right? We're a lot of very motivated people who see a problem and then immediately start thinking about how do we solve that. So in that vein, we have to be very comfortable kind of sharing the problems that we're running into. And so one of the things that we have in Denver that is a challenge for us is that we're very, very good at doing what feels good, but then we struggle when it comes to that point of let's create the justification, let's show the data, let's show the proof that what we're doing actually has a benefit to the community. We just kind of tend to sit in, well, but this feels really good. This is a different way of doing things and we like it. So, and from talking with folks just last night, that is not a unique problem to Denver, which was very comforting, where we have a lot of different partners that are doing this work in our communities, and we have disparate data systems. We have reticence to share certain data, and so we've got to get a little bit better at justifying our existence in a little less kind of emotional and a little more objective way.
Can I ask a question about that sort of justification of existence? And look, I'm just spitballing here a little bit, but I think for a lot of us that can feel like it grates, right? Because so many other parts of our public safety infrastructure aren't really asked to justify their existence in the same sort of way. And so I wonder if, maybe the path forward is to get over it and say, well, yeah, maybe it's unfair, but that's the world that we're living in. Or maybe the path forward is that there's something that we need to be doing, right? Or maybe it's a function of time, or maybe it's a function of community engagement. There's something that we can be doing that, begins to sort of feel that we can take at least the existence of the programs for granted. It's not to say that we shouldn't be always, in search of deeper learning, but that we shouldn't have to feel every year that we have to go to, into budget wondering, are we going to exist next year?
And I would say that that's 100% correct, but we have to get to that point first, right? It's the same thing with the conversation about what do we call this, right? We've all had a lot of, the concept of alternative response has been so appropriate, but we were talking last night, what happens in 20 years? Are we still going to be considering this work to be alternative, or should it just be its own thing and not need to be compared to something else to justify its existence? I completely agree, but we've got to get there first.
Thank you. I think that's amazing. Good morning, everybody. Jody Escobar from Albuquerque. I'm just honored to be here in this space with everybody. I just have to say that. I love what you just said about justifying. Like, in 20 years, are we going to be having this conversation? And because of this room and these minds, I say no. I say we're not going to be having the same conversation, because the light is going to be shed that we have been answering the calls for service to our community incorrectly for a long time. I have a unique, I see a lot of heads yep. I have a really unique background. I've been answering calls for service for the last 22 years of my life. I went into the fire service and was a paramedic for the first 10 years. And then after that, I went contract for our state police. And so I worked with our special operations team as a medic element, but worked intimately with the police department for the last 13 years. And so I do have a lens of public safety that understood that we were doing it wrong, right? We've been answering the calls of service for the wrong way for a long time. We've been asking our police officers to figure out what to do with somebody in crisis. And that, I think our speaker earlier said that's also unfair to the police officers. It's unfair to the paramedics that are saying hey, I know how to patch holes and drop you off at the ER, but I don't really know, you want to talk about things? I don't really know. I can take you to the hospital with my lights and sirens, very traumatic, and I can drop you off in the ER, and you can wait for 5 hours to be evaluated by an ER physician that's going to say, okay, you can go. And then you're going to call 911 tomorrow. And so I do think that it's not about necessarily call diversion, right? It's about we're really answering the call correctly now, and you guys are doing that across the country. And wow, that's amazing. So I'm hoping that we're not going to have the same conversation in 20 years. We're going to be we figured out a name, we know what to call ourselves, and we're having a different conversation, and that's really amazing and pivotal.
Yeah, I love that. I really appreciate I really appreciate all of that. And one of the things that it definitely reminds me of is this sort of broader challenge that I know that programs have been dealing with regards to the rest of that continuum of care, right? That call and response are obviously two aspects of the continuum of care, but I know programs across the nation are really struggling to figure out what it means to take up these two parts of the continuum, while the rest of our infrastructure, particularly around destinations, appears to be lacking. And so as folks who are more focused on call and response, how should we be talking and thinking about our work? Are there ways that we should be dreaming differently about either our work or about our systems more broadly that might be able to help us move in the direction of of changing the lack of destinations in our current system.
I'm going to steal what Moki said earlier on one of our calls. She said something very brilliant in saying, "Well, police are successful because we have prisons."
Right. Yeah. No one would think, right? No one would think that that the police are effective if the jail didn't exist, right?
And that really is stuck with me ever since she said that. And I thought, wow, that's really powerful, because I know that our responders in Albuquerque, we do, though getting better, we do lack those places to take folks. And that does a number of things, especially for our responders, right? As a paramedic or an EMS provider, you drop somebody off at the hospital with a pulse, you're like high fives all around, and like, this is a great thing, and we did it. If you're an officer, you take them to prison, and it's like, or whatever that looks like, right? And that's high fives all around. But as a behavioral health alternative responder, you are pivoting 50 times before you find the right answer, right? And so resilience in our responders is really important, to say, hey, keep fighting. You have to keep going, because it's not going to be the first answer, much less the first time that you respond to somebody. Maybe it's the fifth time that they actually have a conversation with you. But then after that fifth time, it's like the eighth place that you can take this person. And wow, like the support for our responders is really profound now, because they're in a fight for itself, right? Like they're having to pivot hard and be resilient in the care that they're giving. And I think that's a difference that we need to shed a light on to be able to support our responders in that way. And resilience is what comes to mind.
Thank you. I also have a thought about that as well. It feels as if linkages to supportive partners is a very big thing in our field. Our ability to appropriate the potential and possible items that we need to hand off to other partners within our community is an important thing to recognize, because, for example, in the city of Dayton, we have many programs that are supportive of our community, and our ability to link with them in order to pass along individuals that they can be supported in the way that specifically that organization is able to do so is very important. And then that also brings up the bigger idea of holistically, what are we doing within our communities and generally speaking with our society with these items? For example, housing. One of the biggest things we talk about, the police in prison. Well, you know what? Many people need housing. Where is this affordable housing at? Are we talking about that? How is it in our communities? Are we able to get these situations like housing in a place where we're able to hand off the individuals who are in need of housing and put them so they have a place to stay? These are questions. I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's definitely a question of just those the basic, requirements of human life that are lacking, right? Like that is often what our teams go out. They're responding to an individual in crisis, but they're also responding to a massive crisis across our society in an extreme imbalance of resources, a unwillingness to allocate the resources to sustain human life, right? Whether that's for healthcare, whether it's for housing, et cetera. So I think it is incumbent on us to reveal that, to remind people of that. But I also think we have a bit of a framing problem, which we're sort of, I think in the U.S. we're stuck in a pretty neoliberal framework where we're kind of talking about people as problems, right? Like, okay, if we had the right things, we could do X, Y, or Z, right? We could handle these problems, right? But we don't talk about human rights in the U.S., right? Human rights are reserved for everybody else in the rest of the world, right? But the basic human rights that people have to healthcare, to housing, to food, to be able to have the dignity of attending to your basic needs, not on a sidewalk. I mean, I think that it would do us well to not get too stuck in trying to justify our existence in capitalist terms, but rather to hold dear to that we are doing this work, I think, because we believe in people's dignity and their ability to live, with that dignity. So I think that's important. The other piece on this, to go back to jails for a minute, I think to the extent that we have to justify our existence, it needs to be an apples to apples comparison, right? Let's compare our apples to their apples, right? So we could talk about this in terms of response, right? Like when our teams show up instead of the police, we get there faster, fewer people get hurt, either responders or the people that are being responded to. People are more likely to get their needs met, even when there's a highly resourced system on one side, the jails, right? And a highly, inadequate system, a patchwork system of housing and healthcare, et cetera, on the other side. People are still more likely to get a little bit further along, right, with this patchwork system that we have. And then if we move past, the response teams, right, or the police officers being compared, if we compare apples to apples with the places, right, the safety net that we are able to connect people to, versus the jail, right? The fact that it's so normalized for us that somebody can get arrested for sleeping on a sidewalk, and then they can be put into a cement cage and be fed horrible food that makes them sick. The lights are never turned off. You're using the toilet in front of other people you don't know. You're subject to violence. You're crawling with vermin by the time you get out. You lose the spot that you were gonna get because you're no longer considered homeless, right? I mean, I could go on and on and on, but like literally anything, including continuing to sleep on the sidewalk, is better than that. And that's what I hold kind of like in the front of my mind when I do this work, is that putting people in cages because they don't have their basic human rights met it's just no longer acceptable. And we're a part of making that no longer acceptable.
Yeah, I'll say I find myself so frustrated with how short-sighted policymakers have been in so many of our cities. Because they tend to see these problems of, these problems of extreme poverty, of crisis, as disconnected from the ways in which people, in which their residents are thinking about the safety of their communities. And it feels to me that this insistence on doubling down on jails and incarceration and enforcement is sending us back through this cycle over and over again, and then they can't figure out why it is that people are kind of consistently complaining about crime rates and about disorder. I wanted to dig in on something else that you talked about, Moki. You talked about human rights, and it made me think a little bit about the sort of mandate for a lot of this movement that came out of the mandate that did not begin with, but certainly was accelerated after the murder of George Floyd, that was about really changing the experiences of people who are involved in the criminal justice system, who are experiencing policing, who are experiencing incarceration, and this insistence, this focus from this movement on solving that problem. And I want to know how y'all are thinking about how disability justice sort of connects to that in the sort of long term. Because one of the things I talk to my students about all the time is about recognizing that oppression can show up wearing a gun and a badge, but it can also show up, from child services, right? It can show up from social work. It can show up in hospitals, right? And so how do we think about ensuring that the folks who are, really at the center of our work that we don't end up just becoming, right? That we don't end up recreating these systems of oppression that are so insidious and that we see show up in so many other places that are potentially really well-meaning.
So I think this actually ties very much into the previous conversation about the lack of the same level of infrastructure within, kind of this world as opposed to criminal justice. And because of that lack, all of our communities have robust community nonprofits who have been trying to fill that gap for decades. And so that infrastructure exists. We just don't do a very good job of tapping into it, right? So we can partner, to Aaron's point earlier, we can partner with them, but we also have to fund them. We have to create the infrastructure so that they become a part of that solution. And we're trying to do that in Denver. We're not always doing a great job of it. We actually have some folks from our primary community nonprofit who are here, Anna and Maria. So if anybody wants to talk to them, I highly recommend you do that. But if we can engage with the community who have already been doing this work, they're there to keep us honest, and they're there to kind of continue to shepherd the evolution of what these additional services look like and what those connections look like and what the additional infrastructure that we need looks like.
I was really working hard not to talk so much this morning. But this feels like this is right where we're at the Dayton Mediation Center. So at the Dayton Mediation Center, through our mediation response unit that we have, we are a neutral third party to support people in talking about things. And so we take that out literally into the street through our response unit. And so the way that we respond to people rather than react is something that is finely tuned and built through our systemology as we go through a transformative framework that talks about how we support people from moving from a place that is weak and self-absorbed. That's just fancy mediator talk for feeling discombobulated, thrown off by the circumstances, and also simultaneously self-absorbed. And so we support people in that movement out of that place, this weakness and self-absorption, to a place of strength and responsiveness where they're able to now connect better with others, that they're able to think through their issues in a better way. And so just at the base of what we do, we're able to support people in the way that they need to. We're not trying to be authoritarians and trying to have people do things in a certain way, but it's the way that we come to people so that they're able to say, oh, okay, you know what, these responders, they're here for us. They connect with us. They're here to support us in whatever way that we need, and that they're available to, if necessary, link us with resources. And then if there are other organizations, if they need to get with our social worker, we can refer them there. So it feels like approach to how we do things is something that we need to keep first and foremost in our mind. And if we're able to do that, I think that we're going to be good.
I think Moki said it again. She's great. She said, I respond in a way that people's human rights are always in the forefront of what I'm thinking and how I respond. And I think that it's our job as a department, though we're a city department, right? We're in Albuquerque, we're the third branch of public safety. We're general funded by the government. And so it's extremely important for us to make sure that we don't just become, as you were saying, Tahir, is that we don't just become part of that system. We already knew that we were answering the call wrong. And so it's important that we teach in our academy and we're teaching in our classes that this is a different response. This is different, right? We're not going to be on the clock for somebody in crisis. Like, it's not about turning the call time over. It's not about, it's about getting there quickly, but it's not about, okay, cool, I've been here for an hour. I have calls pending. Like, that's not going to be us. That can't ever be us, because then we're just one of them. And we're one of us. And that's what's powerful about this group of people, is that we are figuring out a way to do it differently, with the people in mind, with people's rights, with people's feelings, with the right response always at our forefront. And that has to be taught, I think, from the very beginning in our responders. And some of our responders are coming over from past experience. And I think in the academy, our deputy of field is here, Walter, is he says, you know, leave your ego at the door and forget everything that you come with. It's gonna benefit you in a way, but this is different. This is different. You have to open your mind and your hearts to being able to respond in a different way than what we know. Not just where you came from, but what society knows as a first response. And we have to be vigilant about keeping the vision clear.
Can I just add something real quick? I think in order to avoid that kind of co-optation, I think we also have to constantly be asking ourselves why, right? Oh, you want us to take on this particular scope within the city. Why, right? Oh, you want us to go out and close encampments. Why, right? And I came up with this kind of sick metaphor, which may or may not be helpful, but it kind of makes me think, like, if somebody were to say to you, like, okay, we're going to smash your finger with this hammer, and do you want me to do it, who knows you, or should we ask the first guy who walks in? And it's like, well, yeah, I guess I would choose, like, I want you to do it because you might, like, smash it a little less, like, harshly. Right? Like, the guy who's walking by might have had a really bad day, but, like, why do you have to smash my finger? And that, to me, that's the encampment closure conversation. It's like, why are we closing encampments? Because we don't want to see encampments? Sure, we might close them gentler, but why? Why?
And this brings up another thought for me about the whole idea of co-opting. It feels as if individuals in our field were always on the defensive. I've always thought that while we wouldn't want to do our job using we don't want to use force, going the opposite direction, the other elements of enforcement, or not enforcement, but in serving the public, police or otherwise, that they certainly could utilize our model of support. And so instead of being on the defensive, how about we push our model the other direction?
I want to, so this conference, we have practitioners, we have advocates, we have researchers, and each of y'all are part of this program that we run at Georgetown KICS, this Alternative Response Research Collective, where we are working with 9 programs from across the nation to really try to lock in on best practices, right? Understand the sort of differences between different models, see where there's overlap, see where folks are doing things differently, and we're learning so much from working with y'all. And I know that, between us and lots of other universities that are interested in this work, there is something of a drain on our programs, right? And, in as much as we work really hard to try to make sure that there's something of an exchange, that we are doing leadership development, that we're providing you with, opportunities to make the kinds of connections that will be helpful for you. But I feel really aware all the time that each time we ask you to join a call, each time we try to have a conversation with you, it's more stuff, right? And it's not just us. So I guess just, if you could talk about the sort of experience of being researched and what it is that the advocates and the researchers and the funders who are funding the research need to know about, how to make that less bad, right? Maybe even good, right? Like, let us, what would it be helpful for folks like us to know in terms of how we engage in the field? You can yell at me, it's okay. I consent.
I mean, I'll pipe back in just briefly. I think that I think one thing that researchers could do as they're focused on our individual programs is consider how they might also be able to bring some of their research attention to the system that we're in, So, in thinking about kind of comparing apples to apples, it can be really challenging if there's not adequate attention being paid to what are the calls for service, what is the disposition of these calls for service, what are the arrests that are happening, what's happening once folks are booked, what's the length of stay, what's the booking trends. Like, there's a whole ecosystem that we are in, and I think it can kind of highlight, if the focus is just on us, it is really it's not zoomed out enough to say like us instead of, right? Or us in the context of all of our other systems and how they're impacting people's lives. So I think having some support to be able to do that level of context analysis would be very helpful.
And I would add researchers who understand this space. So in Denver, we've been going through a third-party evaluation, and it's been very difficult because not only are we trying to provide data for them to give us input, we're having to give them a lot of context and education about what these data mean, particularly when you're talking about, like in 911, our computer-aided dispatch systems are just a mess. And so to give someone the data table is one thing. To help them understand that, even an actual data scientist, is something entirely different. So we need researchers who are really interested in specializing in this space, because it's a very unique animal.
And then also, too, along those lines, just the ability for all of us to provide grace to each other in these spaces, because it's difficult, as you're talking about. We're doing the same thing, in this delivering information, delivering data, the researchers getting that information from us, the language that we use around things to make sure that there's a proper output, just allowing grace in that process and being able to deal with each other, as humans that are here working in the same direction, feels like that's a big thing.
And yeah, I would say that for everybody here, if you weren't here 2 years ago, take the opportunity to meet people and talk to folks. Some of the best ongoing relationships that I have are with folks that I met 2 years ago. And just that continuing conversation and sharing of ideas and even just getting together to admire a problem and commiserate and vent is so cathartic. So it's important to kind of make those connections. And that's where, programs like KICS are so fantastic, is because you're not just doing the research, but you're keeping us connected so that we can continue moving the ball down the field.
So we've talked a lot about things that are challenging. I want to ask you to think about something that is giving you life in your programs right now. Is there anything that you're experimenting with, that you're trying out in your program that feels really exciting and invigorating to you?
All right, I'll go. So as the director of Denver 911, surprise, surprise, I'm really invested in the 911 side of things. And we're doing some really fun stuff, right? There's a lot of conversation about how these programs should be dispatched, where the calls should go, and all of that. And those are very important conversations to have. And we are at least trying to lean in on the 911 side of things. So working on how do we train our call takers to answer these calls effectively, right? One of the things that we've talked about is that 911, our job is to kind of assume worst case scenario. And we're thinking about scene safety and officer safety, and we drill this into their heads, and then we get somebody who calls who maybe doesn't know what kind of response they need, but they clearly don't need a law enforcement response. They don't need an ambulance. And how do we train our folks to identify that, approach that call with a little more empathy and optimism, and get them the right response? So that's one. And then the second is further ingraining alternative response, crisis, community response, whatever we wind up calling it, into the infrastructure within Denver 911. So right now, those calls come in and they get put up for dispatch, and it's actually our police dispatchers who are looking at a list of calls that are police, a list of calls that go to STAR, and trying to advocate for STAR, but it still feels very much like we're operating within the law enforcement infrastructure. So we are trying to create a separate agency within our, and it gets really complex when you talk about our computer systems, but a separate dispatcher whose job is just to receive those calls that go to STAR. And then it's a little bit more of intentional work to add police if something happens where law enforcement is needed, or to add an ambulance if something happens where a medical response is needed. But by default, it's going to somebody whose sole responsibility is to send these calls to STAR and ensure that that response is what goes first.
So some positive things that are going on with the mediation response unit at the Dayton Mediation Center, City of Dayton, is that we will be fully staffed for the first time here at the end of the month. So we're going to have, so that's fantastic. And so along with that, we have expanded our hours from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And so we're able to get to more of the community than we had previously when we were just going to 6 p.m. And so another positive aspect about that is to be able to build within our community, for them to be to get a greater understanding of what it is that the mediation response unit does and how we operate. This is some things we've been talking about. You know, what's with branding? How does the community continue to learn more about you? One thing that I've seen over the past 11 years is at the Mediation Center, generally speaking, this is a difficult thing. That for people to know that we exist, even though the Mediation Center itself has been around for 38 years, and now for our mediation response unit now for 3 years. How do we continue to build within community? So that's something that feels like, well, that's exciting to continue to get the messaging out of the community that there's more than one way of doing things, because every time we run into someone, they're like, oh, mediation response unit, you were here for these calls and you do these things. We're like, that's amazing. We're glad that we have that in the city. And yet, you know, simultaneously, so very few people know, even though we've responded now in the past 3 years, upwards of 8,000 calls or so. So just that expanded ability to communicate with the community, that feels like that is, that's very exciting.
Yeah, I'll continue with that theme. Although I have to tell you, it makes me both feel better and worse that y'all have been around, 5 times longer than us, and people still don't know that you exist.
So it feels like the nature of conflict.
Yeah.
These things. Yeah.
But that continues to be our challenge as well, and I think it's because we're up against such an ingrained, system. So we recently received a SAMHSA mental health awareness training grant, and we are trying to really use that to help solve this problem of people not knowing, not only that we exist and that we're available through our 311 line, but also just not having there's not strong sort of civic literacy around what's the behavioral health system and how do I navigate it, right? Unless you yourself have done it often in crisis with somebody you love, or right, like you learn on the job, I think, in navigating our systems. The same with our local jail system, right? And so what we've built into that training is not only helping people understand how to recognize mental distress and how to show up as a good friend or neighbor to somebody, that kind of accompaniment, but also what are the systems locally, and what are some of the pitfalls in navigating those systems? What are some of the risks? What does it mean when you call 911? Like what actually might happen to somebody? So I think that I'm really excited about that. We've started offering this both virtually for anybody who'd like to sign up, and then also in person alongside, co-hosted by groups in the neighborhoods and other advocacy groups. So it gives us an opportunity to really sit with people who are raising their hand for a kind of a deeper level of understanding, to really help them come out as more confident community members, right? And also with a better understanding of how our systems work, where they fail, which allows them, I think, to ultimately become better advocates for our work as well.
We just passed budget season, so I did call on a few friends in this space, and Amy, thank you for the support and everybody. And hopefully in 20 years we're not celebrating passing budget season, but I do feel like that's where we're at in Albuquerque. Though a very flat budget for us. We're up against a handful of challenges, of course, not just federally, but locally. We're in a mayoral race too, and Mayor Keller is and Mariela Guiding Light in the city founded the community safety department, and so we have a lot that we're fighting for in a way. But passing the budget season, a flat budget year, and not being cut in any type of way was a big win for us. And we're really happy. Yeah. With that, something that is really exciting for me is that our leadership team and our department right now is just trying to plant flags of ACS facilities across the city of Albuquerque. And we're up to 4 locations right now. One of them is a co-space, and most recently on the southwest side of the town, there'll be a Southwest Public Safety Center. And so it's a fire station, it's a police station, and it's a little building on the side that's connected to the building, and it's a community safety department element. And we just did a walkthrough, and I thought, man, what a beautiful thing. I mean, this was set in motion when Mariela was director and like I said, guiding light in the city. But just to say, we're here and we're not going anywhere, and we're putting the walls up to say, try to come like penetrate this fortress. We're just going to keep planting flags in Albuquerque, and that's a mission that's really exciting for me.
Yeah, 100,000 calls.
Yes, sir.
Celebrated, yes. Yeah, I mean, look, we started this conversation by talking about durability and literally having physical walls, and I know that y'all have your own HQ as well. Certainly feels part of that conversation.